looking from y'all from way up here. I remember several years ago, I was preaching on a Sunday morning and talking about being nice to guests. That's important. It's really cool that our families feel like family gatherings, but sometimes it leaves us insensitive to those who aren't family, people who are visiting with us. And so you've all got a story, right? About going someplace and people almost treated your presence like an intrusion. So I was trying to address that with our church family and say, we really need to be more thoughtful about our guests. And one of the points I made is, I said, look, when we're done, don't just rush right out the door. Look around and see who's a guest this morning and make sure you pause and greet them. And so that was one of the points I made in the sermon. And then I finished and I went and stood in the back while some closing remarks are made. And then we had a prayer. And when the prayer was over and I opened my eyes, they immediately were drawn to a flash over to my right. There was a row of like 5 teenagers right over here. And as soon as the prayer was done, they all moved toward that door, which says exit. I guess you can get out that way, huh? So, yeah, it was that way in this building too. And so they went out through that door and out the exit. And so I shifted so I could look out of the parking lot and see where they were moving so quick. I mean, it's like the building was on fire. They were out like a shot. And so I watched them, and they go out into the parking lot, and they pile into the car of one of these kids' families, and they sat there, and I watched them. They sat there the whole time while mom and dad visited till it was time to go, and then mom and dad took them home. So they'd done the very thing that I said not to do in the lesson. Don't just rush out the door. Greet a guest. So as it worked out, providentially, I think, I was teaching their Bible class next Wednesday. Yeah, I know, y'all see this coming, right? It was a come to Jesus meeting. So I kind of took the first 5-minute class and I fussed at them. I said, come on, I just preached about this. And I said, stop and visit the guests and don't rush out the door. And the first thing you guys do is you fly out the door and leave. And I went on like that for a little bit. And finally one of the girls raised her hand and she said, Mr. David, we didn't know you were talking to us. I have never forgotten that. It was an epiphany moment for me. The light came on. And I remember it because it reminds me of something that I need to remember about young people. And so I'm mentioning the story to you this morning because I hope you will remember this too. I think sometimes when we think about our kids and their part in the Lord's work, we see that as only something in the future. In fact, have you used this language before? Have you ever talked about young people as the next generation? I've heard guys pray that before. And God, we pray for our young people who are the next generation to serve the Lord. Now, I will tell you, as a pragmatist, I understand that is so, that there's a very real sense in which kids are the next generation. And so if the Lord tarries and this church remains faithful, somewhere out there is a date in time in which everyone sitting here this morning is going to be in the ground. Someone thought, wow, that was a little ray of sunshine on all of us this morning. That is not a pessimistic view of life, brothers and sisters. That is life. We are all going to die. And so if this church stays faithful, there's a date out there somewhere where none of us are going to be in this building. Somebody else is going to be sitting in this pew. Somebody else is going to be standing in this pulpit. Someone else is going to lead the songs. Someone else is going to teach the classes, shepherd the family. Other people are going to be out in this community sharing the message, right? So there is a very real sense in which young people are that next generation. So I'm not saying it's wrong to think about it in those terms, but I am going to tell you that I think when we say that, I think our kids are hearing something else. And what they're hearing is, it's not my turn yet. And so their thinking is that in their youth, they get a pass on meaningful labor in the kingdom, and that they really get involved somewhere out there, maybe after they turn 18, or when they get done with college, or after they're married and have a family. That's when meaningful service begins. But in the in-between period, they get to warm a pew. And I have to tell you, brothers and sisters, I don't know this church family well enough to be critical, right? So I'm not judging you. But most of the time, churches accommodate that. And they go along with it. And I've seen that. I've seen that spirit in young people. I started preaching in the little college town of Huntsville, Texas. Sam Houston State University was there. Just had a little group of college students, maybe 6, 8, 10 kids in total. And I would tell you, I didn't just see that in the way the kids interacted and behaved with us. They said it to me. I remember one young man in particular, a gifted song leader, and going to school there at the time, and we were kind of nudging him to get more involved in our work. And I got to tell you, he drew a line in the sand with us. At one point, he just said, "Look, I am here to get an education. And while I am here for those 4 years, that is going to be my focus. I will come when I can, when it works with my college schedule, but you guys just cannot ask any more of me than that. I am here to get educated." And he got a great education and went on to live a fantastic life, have a great career, and without the Lord. He had no faith. Time he got done. So I am concerned that the way we talk about young people is sending the wrong message. I'm not naive here, folks. I do understand that as we get older, our kingdom abilities and our maturities should make us more useful to God. I mean, all the way through life, we ought to get better and better and better at the things that we do for the Lord. So I understand that young people are just starting out in that. But I would remind you that young disciples are disciples and possessed with the same responsibilities that any disciple had. Jesus said, if anyone wishes to come after him, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And that applies to disciples who are 12, just as it applies to disciples who are 52, and frankly, disciples who are 92. I mentioned 92 because we had a 92-year-old guy where I was preaching in Birmingham, still preaching the gospel, had a caregiver, wound up leading that man to Christ. We all got work to do in the kingdom. So I am worried that we are underestimating the kingdom value of our youth. And worse than that, expecting less from them than God does. And so I have tried to stop using next generation language because I don't want to continue to add to that misunderstanding. What I've tried to do is talking it a different way. I've tried to talk about young people as the next generation that needs to be activated now. How do we take kids in their youth and get them involved in meaningful kingdom labor? And so if we are going to do that, I think some things have to change, and that's really where I want to focus our attention this morning. If I click this, is something going to happen? Wow, there it is. It's been an adventure with the slides this weekend. My fault on that. So I want to talk to you about how we can get young people involved in a meaningful way now. I've intentionally chosen to go positive because last hour was a little dark, wasn't it? And I do think that being dark sometimes is important because we need to know the kind of world our kids are in and get them ready for it. But now I want to go the other direction and say something that I think is more positive, and that is what we can do as a church family to be sure our kids don't just warm a pew while they're growing up here, but they get involved in the kingdom labor in a meaningful way. So a couple of things are going to have to change if we're going to do that. First of all, if we are going to pull that off, we are going to have to develop a new perspective on our kids. In other words, we're going to have to learn to look at our kids in a new way. Can I explain to you what I mean by that? I think when we look at our kids, what we see are kids. Does that make sense to you? I think that's why daddies have a hard time helping their daughters dress modestly? Honestly. I mean, you've seen some girls dress and you thought, does this girl have a dad who was a teenage boy at one time and he lets her dress this way? What's that about? And here's the answer to that. Because when he looks at a 16-year-old daughter, he doesn't see a 16-year-old young woman. What does he see? A 6-year-old princess. And the thought of his 6-year-old princess being the object of a boy's lust, well, it's enough motivation to get him to go buy a weapon, right? This is not happening. Here's a problem with that. Hear me, dads. She's not a 6-year-old princess. She is a 16-year-old beautiful young woman, and the boys are looking. Cover her up. Okay? But that's our problem sometimes. And that connects to what we're saying here. When we think about kingdom work, folks, kingdom work is important stuff. And we look at our kids and we see kids, and the two don't go together, right? Because kids aren't cut out to do kingdom work. And so what happens in some churches is that kids are just ignored until they're 18 years old. It's like they're not here. We send them back there to Bible class. Or if they are given any task, it's just sort of token task. I remember walking through the auditorium one time with one of the elders. He was looking at the pews. They were kind of scuffed, people kicking them and scratching them and things like that. And he said, what we need is to get the teenagers in here and give them some old English and let them shine up these pews. Now look, I think teenagers can do that. I am not sure that is the limit of their kingdom capabilities. And let me tell you what inspires me about that. What changed my perspective on young people, of all things, was the Bible. So I started spending some time years ago thinking about the young people we encounter in the Bible. So for a moment, just let your brain brainstorm for a minute. You don't have to pay attention to me. Just start thinking about young people in the Bible. Pew shiners, right? So Joseph comes to mind. And one of the things that's useful about Joseph is we get some age markers for him. Joseph, remarkable guy. He was able to overcome that incredibly dysfunctional family. I mean, Jacob was a mess as a dad. You want to feel better about your fatherhood? Go read about Jacob. He was terrible. And Joseph was able to overcome that mess. And then he was in Potiphar's house, got sold by his brothers into slavery, and he overcame all that and did better. And then Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, and he ends up in jail, and he's in that mess, and he overcomes all of that. I mean, you start looking at Joseph's life, and it's just one obstacle, one mess after another. And he always rises to the top and overcomes. I love that about him. But the cool thing about his story is that all the troubles in his life came in his youth. You ever think about that? The text tells us that he's 17 years old when the troubles begin, when he gets sold into slavery. So we're talking about a teenage kid from a dysfunctional home. And he's no older than 30 by the time he finally gets out of prison. So this is a teenage, young adult kid during all this period of adversity in his life. And I look at Joseph's life, I look at what he did, and I think our kids can do better, right? And then I think about David. I think about David before he was King David. Do you remember the great story about David before he was King David? So I'm headed back to 1 Samuel 17. I throw this one in just because I like to read this little text I'm about to read. 1 Samuel 17. David was willing to do what no grown-up Israelite soldier was willing to do. When they were being taunted by the Philistine giant, Goliath, David isn't even old enough to be in the military at this point. He just shows up to bring supplies to his brethren, and he hears Goliath taunting the armies of Jehovah. And the great thing about David, 1 Samuel 17, he gets insulted by that. And his reaction is, who is this guy to be taunting the armies of Jehovah? He is insulted for God. And his brothers say, would you be quiet and go home? But David doesn't go home. He goes out on the battlefield. And not only is he willing to go out and take on Goliath, but he trash talks him before the contest. You realize that? 1 Samuel 17, verse 45. David says, you come to me. And remember, he's staring up at a 9-foot giant, right? And he says, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you've taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the armies of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know, that there is a God in Israel, and that this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by faith or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Now you know where the battle belongs to the Lord comes from, right? Y'all sing that song here? It comes from here. Who taught us that lesson? I don't know how old David was. I just know everybody who said, you can't fight Goliath. You're a kid, right? So all those men in the Israelite armies, verse 47, learned that the battle is the Lord from the little boy David. And if I'm working on a list like that, I've got to put Josiah in that list. I mentioned him this weekend. So 2 Chronicles 34, Josiah's story is such a cool story. We ought to give it more attention than we do. This guy leads one of the greatest revivals that you're going to read about in Old Testament history. Verse 3, this is 2 Chronicles 34, verse 3, he begins to seek the Lord as God and purge Judah and Jerusalem to the high places and tears down the altars, verse 4. Verse 5, burns the bone of the priests and desecrates the altars. And then in verse 8, begins to repair the house of the Lord. I mean, we could just tell the story this morning. But if you know Josiah's story, I've skipped over the good part, right? Because verse 1 says he was 8 years old when he became king. And in the 8th year of his reign, so he's 16, that's when he begins to seek the Lord. The text adds, in his youth, right? And in the 12th year, so now he's a young adult, is when he begins the purge, getting rid of idolatry from the nation. This great revival you read about in 2 Chronicles 34 is a revival that's led by a kid. Now here's the thing that I want to say to you about these kids. There is nothing remarkable about these kids. God had not endowed them with some miraculous measure of faith and trust. Here's what I want you to see. These are kids like our kids. And they're not pew shiners. They do these amazing things for the Lord. And when I read these stories in the Bible, one of the lessons I take away is our kids can do more. Okay? And if they can do more, if that potential is like, it helps me see the potential that's in our kids. And if it is there, if you're with me on that, then that brings us to the second thing that's got to change. Once we see them in a new way, then we've got to alter our expectations. And so let's work on that for a minute. Think about this question. What do we expect from our kids? You know what I've heard some parents say? I'm just glad my kids are here. I've heard people say that. I'm just happy that the warm body is in the pew. And then some say, well, you know, I don't just want my kids here, but they better behave when they're sitting in the pew, right? And then, if we could get our kids to fill out empty blanks in a lesson book and show up for a special weekend where we have studies for them, or to go to monthly devos, if they will come and sit in the pew and behave and put words and blanks in a lesson book and attend devos, then we start saying things like, we have an amazing group of young people in this church. I'm glad you're laughing, Herb, because we need to. I'm thinking, that's it? That's where the bar is? All I got to do is show up, and it takes 8 minutes to fill. I wrote the books. I know how long it takes to fill them out, okay? 8 minutes to fill in the answers in the books. I think about Josiah, I think about David, I think about Joseph, I think about Daniel. We didn't even talk about him today. And I think our kids can do more. So I think about a biblical standard. Let's let Scripture set the bar. So I'm thinking about this text that was on the slide in 1 Timothy 4. Will you look at that with me? 1 Timothy 4. Let's look at verse 12. 1 Timothy 4, verse 12. So Paul writes this letter to this young preacher, and here's what he says. Let no one look down on your youthfulness. So he was still considered young. But rather, in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity, show yourself an example of those who believe. So he gives us a list of 5. Speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. You be an example as a young man of those who believe. So let me suggest something about the list. I don't think this is an all-inclusive list. I don't think what Paul is saying to Timothy is, in these 5 areas, but only in these 5 areas, I want you to be an example. Are you with me on that? I think it's a representative list. I think he just picked 5. And he could have easily have substituted another 5. I think what Paul is really saying to Timothy is, as a young man, in every facet of kingdom citizenship, you show everybody what it means to be a follower of Jesus. How about if we set the bar there? How about that, if that's what we expect from our young people? In every facet of New Testament discipleship, you be an example of what a believer is supposed to be about. That's a biblical place to set the bar. Does that mean that their warm body is going to be in the pew? Where's yours this morning? Of course it does. And that they'll behave? Yes. And that they'll fill out answers in a lesson book? Don't even get me started on that. That's a whole other rant. But folks, so much more than that. Do you realize kids can be passionate about learning Scripture? We don't need to lure them here with carnal things. They can desire to come and know the Word if we instill that passion in them. I remember so years ago, I had a group of kids come up to me. Is this wide enough that I can actually cross from left to right?
The burning bush.
Herb wants me to talk about the burning bush my wife created. I'm just glad I need to do this back home, because back home it's just narrow enough that everyone kind of freaks out like I'm going to fall off if I try that. So anyway, I apologize. I digress. I had this group of teenagers come up to me after a service, and they said, look, we need a class. We need a class where we can get together and get some answers, because we're talking to our friends about Jesus, and they're asking us stuff we can't answer. And so we need a class where we can just bring those questions and get answers. And I said, well, your class is planned for the next quarter, but maybe after that. I think that's a great idea. I think we can make that happen. And this girl who was leading the group kind of grunted at me and had this exasperated face. I was lost. I didn't know what was going on. She said, okay, you're not getting it. Let me spell this out for you. On Monday nights at 7, we want to come to your house, and we're going to stay for an hour or two, and we want to work on our questions. And then I got it. I understood. Want to work on our questions. And so they did. They started coming over on Monday nights at 7 for like 6 years. I even named the Bible study after her. I called it the Kristen Riley Memorial Bible Study, since she was the one who insisted on it. But listen, they were the ones. This was all them. It was their desire to know the truth, be able to share it with our friends. Our kids can be passionate about their prayers. They can be passionate about winning lost people. I have been in churches where we'd have these teenagers sitting down here. They're not here with their parents. They got up on Sunday morning. They came all by themselves. Sometimes they came over the objection of their parents because one of our kids went to school with them, or they were in some organization together, and they got talking about the Lord, and they shared the gospel with them, and this person responded and became a Christian. Kids can do that. They can make choices. They can be sacrificial and choose that they're going to put spiritual things, make it the priority over other things. They can be involved in what is happening here. I've seen young people involved in caring for elderly members. I've seen young people get involved in teaching Bible classes and developing those skills. In fact, I will tell you what we've discovered over the years. It isn't really about the task. It's just about what we expect. So I think we need to reconsider where we're setting the bar. I think our kids can do more, and we need to have higher expectations. But now, thirdly, once we begin to raise the expectations and say, okay, they can do a lot more, then the third thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to begin creating opportunities for them to get involved. And so in 1 Peter chapter 4, in 1 Peter 4, verses 9 and 10, Peter says that each of us has been blessed by God with the ability to serve in the kingdom, as each one has received a special gift, right? You see that there? So let me just pause over that. Everybody sitting in this crowd today, every last person, has gifts given to them by God that have a kingdom application. And some of you, I have already seen over the weekend exercising those gifts and leading worship and doing a blessed work with technology. Thank you, brother. And helping us out with those kind of things. Using our gifts for the good of the kingdom of God. So here are the things I want you to realize. Kids too. The young people that grow up among us, they have these same talents and abilities and gifts given by God that have a kingdom application. It's something they can do to help the Lord in His cause. And I think one of the most important things as a church family we do for our young people during the growing up period that they are with us is, one, we help them identify their gifts. We don't always know what they are, right? So we help them figure that out, answer that question, what do I have that I could use for the Lord? And then two, we help them to begin to hone those gifts and to form those skills so that they can actually begin to put them to use in the kingdom of God. Now, folks, we've got to do that while they're growing up among us because I don't know how it is here, but where I preach at Kleinwood, when kids hit 18, this terrible thing happens. They leave. Does that happen to y'all here? We just graduated 3 awesome kids that were in our high school class. One is at Texas A&M, one is at Sam Houston, one is at SFA. They all left and went somewhere else. I tell you, it's worse than that because our kids don't come back. Our girls go over to A&M, they meet some punk boy. That's the nicest thing I can say about them. And they fall in love, and they get married, and they don't ever come back. I told the preacher over at College Station, I said, look, if y'all take any more of our kids, we're going to put a trade embargo against you. Y'all got to send some people back to us. But what's lost is our opportunity. So think about that. If we just start paying attention until they were 18, and then at 18 they're leaving, what we did with them is nothing. We lost the opportunity to get them ready. But what they did learn is that my role in the church is to put my warm body in a pew. And so what do they do when they go to college? Exactly what we trained them to do. They go to college, they find a cushy place, and they put their body in the pew. And then they don't. I think it's one reason young people find it so easy to walk away from us. They were never connected here anyway. They just showed up and put their body in a pew. So, what's the point? We need to create opportunities for our young people to get involved now. In fact, our motto with our kids is 3 words. While we have them, our goal is to get them equipped to serve. So if our girls have some abilities to help little kids learn about God, they are going to have taken a couple of turns teaching a children's class with an experienced teacher. If we got some kids that are really gifted at singing, and man, we just found one of our junior high boys. Wow, can this kid sing? He's got this voice that was like, boom, got to turn the mic down. I'm like, why are you not leading singing? So now he is, right? We got a wonderful guy back at Kleinwood that's just made it his purpose. Runs our song leading, and he just gathers up these little boys, and he gets back in the classroom, and oh boy, it's rugged, okay? Because when you're starting out learning how to be a song leader, right, it's rugged, right? I've seen him in the room, and I think, well, I'm glad that's his job, okay? Glad I don't have that job. But he's doing it, and he's forming us up, some great song leaders. One of our young boys, it's kind of funny. He is shorter than my wife. It's remarkable. And he looks like he's 12, and he just graduated high school. And man, can he lead song worship. Most enthusiastic song leader I've ever seen. Well, no, I've heard Steve Garrett, second most enthusiastic song leader I've ever seen. And he went up to Nacogdoches to SFA. I called the preacher up there. I said, I'm sending you a good kid. Y'all take care of him. And by the way, if he's not lead singing in a month, you've fallen down on your job. So he's ready to leave and go work. One of our girls had a daddy who did Bible drill with little kids. Anybody ever done that around here? Bible drill, get all the kids on front row for 20 minutes on Sunday afternoon and sing some songs and learn some Bible verses and all that. Her daddy did that. So she picked that up from daddy, and she went to this church, and she started getting the kids back in the classroom doing Bible drill with them. She was equipped to serve. Do you see it? They already need to know what their talents are before they leave. They already need to have honed those and know how to use them, so that when they leave, they're ready to go. They don't just go sit and warm a pew. So here's my challenge to you. I want you to think about what you do in the kingdom. What's your thing? Well, where area do you work? If you're thinking, not sure I have an area, I show up and sit in the pew. Well, we need to fix that. When you figure out what your thing is, here's what I want you to think about. Can I get a young person interested in doing what I do? Whatever it is. Maybe what you do is staple paper on the board and put border around it and cute pictures in the children's classroom. We need people to do that. Amen. Or maybe your thing is, I just kind of pay attention to the forgotten people in our church family. Maybe like widows who at times get overlooked in all the gathering things. I just try to do things for them. Man, would you grab a couple teenage girls and get them interested in that? Because we need people who do that work. That's some of the most important work in the kingdom. You see it? See if you can get some young person interested in doing what you do, because we need opportunities. We're done at noon, right?
I'm not answering that.
I got kind of off on that point, and I forgot how long I went on it. So if we were supposed to be done like 10 minutes ago, tell me, right? Okay. Because I do have one more thing, and this one's really, really critical. As we create these new opportunities, what we're going to have to do is make sure somebody is there to hold these kids accountable, to make sure they take advantage of the opportunity. And God gave that job to someone. That's mom and dad's job. So think about Ephesians 6:4. We're to bring up our children in the discipline and instruction of the Lord, right? That's a big umbrella idea. And underneath it are things like help your kids figure out their gift, and encourage your kids to use their gift for kingdom service. Now, a little dark for a second. I have discovered a thing over the years is I've spent a lot of my preaching life working with young people, that parents, oddly, are the biggest liability in the process. And I don't understand that. That they are actually resistant to encouraging their kids to get involved in the kingdom in a meaningful way. I remember one dad saying to me, I just kind of let my kid decide for themselves if they want to do that kind of stuff. Like if they want to go to a Devo. I just kind of let them decide for themselves. And I didn't say it, but just know it was in my mind once my filter worked. And what I wanted to say is, wow, does that work with vegetables? Right? So when your wife is serving dinner, do your kids get to say, I am not feeling vegetables tonight. Why don't you do a pizza for me, Mom? Do they get to do that? How about with school? Wouldn't that be cool if we could wake up on Monday and say, I'm just not feeling school today. I think I'm going to drive over the beach and watch the sunset. Do kids get to choose that? It's bizarre. I can tell you something else I knew about this daddy. I knew his boys played football. Football practice in August in Texas brutal. His boys did not miss football practice. Ever. Not optional. But a Devo on a Sunday night was. You know what that is, folks? That's bad parenting. That's backwards. School, math, sports, that's the secondary stuff of this life. Kingdom, heaven, kingdom labors. It's the most important stuff in all of our lives. And if that's not where it's at, okay, priority shift. We need to work on that. So we need mom and dads to help us. Sometimes when kids have to try something new, they just need someone back there who's gonna give them a little nudge, because none of us like new stuff, right? And we need a little push sometimes. So we do a thing with our boys. So equipping new worship leaders is an important facet of our work with our young people. So we do a little thing on 4:30. We still meet on Sunday nights. So that wasn't a jab. That was just to help the story. We meet 30 minutes early, and we have a whole lineup of boys who lead some kind of worship. So some of the boys will lead a song, some make a little talk, some lead prayers, and then someone opens it and closes it. It's sort of like a mini Wednesday night service is what it is. And so for about 30 minutes, our boys do that. One of my jobs is to draft the boys to make their first talk, which is the worst task, okay? So I'll go up to some boy and I'll say, you know, you've never made a talk before. Next month, I'm going to put you down to make a talk. And usually what they'll say is I do really good prayers. And I'll say, yeah, I know, but I need you to do a talk next time. And I will help you, which literally means sometimes mom drops him off at my office and he sits next to me and I write it for him, the whole thing, trying to use 7th grade words. So people won't think I did it, but I do. I write it for him, and I print it out on a piece of paper. And then his time comes, and he's sitting here on the front pew waiting for his turn, and he's trembling physically. You could see it. His body is shaking, and the paper's all crumpled up because he's read it over and over and over again. And his turn gets up, and he stands up here. This is great, this mic's here, because this is what it looks like. He gets up here in front of this thing, and he's holding this paper's shaking, and he reads it like 1,500 words in 90 seconds. I mean, I'm going to get this thing done, right? And he does it. And he finishes and he goes and he sits down on the pew. And I always watch because here's what I see. I'm done. And he's sitting there, I promise you, saying, I'm never doing that again. I thought I was going to die. Okay? And then they finish. And our widows take over. And our widows will come down to the front and they'll find the boys. And they'll just love on them. That was so good. Wow, who knew you were so capable? We haven't had that kind of preaching here in a long time. I'm not sure how to feel about that. They just brag on the boys and pat them on the back. It's beautiful. And almost every time, without exception, I promise this is true, when the widows get done with them, the boys find me. And you know what they want to know? When can it be my turn again? You see it? What did they need? They needed a nudge. And so as we begin to see our kids in a new way and have greater expectations of them and begin opening doors so they can actually do work in a meaningful way, mom and dad, we need you. We need you to be the accountability in their life. To send a message that says into your kids, there's nothing more important that you're going to do in this life and find ways to serve your God and advance his cause in this place. We need you to believe that. Instill that in your kids and hold them accountable to that kind of work. Because we're not just raising our children to grow up and be responsible adults. I want my boys to do that. I think they are. We want them to grow up to serve the Lord. And that really isn't it either. We're all sitting here today because we believe there's a day coming when the trumpet's going to sound. And everything going on in this life is suddenly and dramatically going to come to a screeching halt. And Jesus is going to come back. And I'm going to be before his throne. And I'm going to answer for my life. And heaven or hell is in the balance. And what I want is to go to heaven. And I want, don't you want this too? I want my boys Well, my boys go to heaven. That's what this is all about. So, I need to see them in a new way. You expect more. I need to open doors. And while they're here and under my watch, and I'm responsible for them, we'll give them a little push, encourage them. Make the spiritual things your kids have an opportunity to be a part of the most important thing that's happening in your world. That's Deuteronomy 6 in action. Well, the trumpet is going to sound, and the Lord is going to come, and we are going to answer. So it's really vital right now that you answer the question, am I ready for that? And maybe someone isn't. And right now, what we'd really like to do, encourage you to make a choice for the Lord. If you're a disciple, you realize I'm not on the path, I'm not with him, I need to be. Or you're not a disciple, maybe you've just been coming and visiting and listening, and you've been pondering, maybe you've been white-knuckling it during the invitation song, just sort of holding on to the pew. Hey, give it up. Never going to be right. Life is never going to be right. There's always going to be an emptiness that is filled only by God. So why don't you give up the struggle against that? Make the choice. If we can help you, we're going to sing this song to encourage you, and you make your way down to the front. While we stand, while we sing.